Mario Kart World has been a somewhat controversial release over the past few months of the game being out. While most seem to enjoy the game, there are some pretty glaring flaws with it. The most apparent is 100% the fact that playing online races basically forces you to play on the intermission tracks. Most of the actual race courses in this game are extremely fun and well designed, but then you look at what you'll actually be playing on most of the time, and but luckily, there is a game mode that seems to handle intermissions much better, and that would be Knockout Tour. This is one of the most exciting additions to the game, right behind the snowman. This will have you race on intermissions connecting 6 tracks together, and at each checkpoint, the bottom 4 racers will be eliminated. That eventually leads to a very intense 4-person race for the final lap. This was such a creative game mode and makes the intermissions feel a bit more fun to play on since it feels a lot more intense as you try and stay alive. For the most part, people seem to be perfectly happy with how this mode was implemented. The only issue I have with it is the fact that we only get 8 preset routes to race on. There are 202 intermissions in this game, so I really think there should have been an option to randomize the route to keep the game mode fresh. But with that said, for the 8 routes we do have, some are bound to be worse than others. So today, I thought it'd be fun to rank all of the Knockout Tour rallies from the worst to the best. The criteria for this ranking simply comes down to how much fun I have on each route, how unique the set pieces are, and if I think it works well in Knockout Tour structure. So if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let's jump right in. Now before I reveal the ranking, I'm gonna have to be honest with you all. I'm not a top player. Unfortunately, with how busy I am, I haven't gotten to play as much as I would want. But whenever I do get some spare time, I try my best to play a bit of Knockout Tour, so I do think I have enough experience in the mode where I'm comfortable with my rankings. Even if I'm not 100% on the rest of the list though, I can tell you in full confidence the Cherry Rally sucks. Yeah, so the number 8 spot easily goes to the Cherry Rally, and I would be shocked if anyone disagrees. We'll go through each of these section by section and talk about any highlights or lowlights. We begin on Peach Beach and have to drive over to Dino Dino Jungle. Right out of the gate, this area on the beach is extremely boring as it's just a long straight shot forward. There are a couple cataquacks, but I have never even been close to getting hit by one. You could argue that this acts as a fun spot to attack a lot of people, but honestly, it's so early into the race that it doesn't feel like it matters. Especially because this specific intermission is what I believe to be the longest one in any of these Knockout Tours. It feels like this section goes on forever, which I don't love at the start of a race. It feels very annoying to play for like 3 minutes and get eliminated in the first section. I mean, not me, I could never, I'm too good. Anyway, at least they do fill this long intermission with some good content, as it has us race along some waterfalls and through the dino infested jungle. I like this area in the Grand Prix, and it's a really good set piece here too. Going into section 2, we now have to drive toward Koopa Troopa Beach. The dinos continue to be obstacles for a bit, and I like how there's a lot of grass to make big cuts through. Unfortunately though, the end of the section I'm really not a fan of. We have to take a long glider into Koopa Troopa Beach, which just feels really drawn out. By the time you land in the water, your positions are almost certainly set because there are no item boxes. If you got a bad pull from the box on the glider, there's really nothing you can do to catch up here. That's always going to happen in Mario Kart, but the fact that this straight shot is so long just makes you have to sit in your misery for several seconds until you eventually get eliminated. In general in this ranking, I really don't like when sections end on long straightaways. At least with turns, it feels like there's more you can do, especially if there are spots for mushrooms. Unfortunately for the Cherry Rally, this bad streak continues into the next section. In contrast to the first, this is what I believe to be the shortest segment in Knockout Tour, pretty much just being a straight shot to DK Spaceport over some floaties. I don't think there's even a single bit of off-road you can cut through here to catch up. There's some off-road near the Yoshis. Yeah, wow man, I can go to the other side, great shortcut. I'd say this section also has the prolonged misery problem that the last one did, though to a slightly lesser degree. Section 4 has us moving from DK Spaceport to Whistle Stop Summit. Fun fact, this is the only Knockout Tour rally with Dino Dino Jungle, Koopa Troopa Beach, DK Spaceport, and Whistle Stop Summit. While Koopa Troopa Beach is, well, bad. The other 3 are some of the best tracks in the game. While I feel like they got decent use out of Dino Dino Jungle, the other 2 here don't feel great. For Spaceport, we only drive in this extremely open area with Giant Robo DK. While that may sound like it'd be an interesting obstacle, like I said, this area is extremely open. I genuinely didn't even catch that he throws barrels here until working on this video because they are so easy to ignore. After that is some of the most generic road we'll be seeing in this video. The fact that there's off-road here does mean that there are some shortcut opportunities, but that's nothing special. The best I can give this section is the fact that I like the Goomba shoes, and the cliffside turns feel a bit more unique. Getting into Whistle Stop Summit for section 5 was extremely extremely disappointing because there's not any rail grinding here. You know, the track's whole gimmick. We basically just stop in for about 3 seconds before leaving and going on some more generic dirt road. Like I said, they really dropped the ball on using these past 2 tracks in Knockout Tour. The best I can give this section compliment-wise is that I like the Grolls here as a unique obstacle. I hope the Groll fans can finally forgive me for how I insulted them in the 2D ranking. After they show up, we get a few more basic turns in the desert that leads us into Desert Hills. Each Knockout Tour ends with a lap on one of the game's tracks. That means the end of the Knockout Tour plays a big part in the ranking since the tracks are most people's favorite parts of the game. With how limited they decided to make Knockout Tour's options, it was really important that they picked good tracks to Desert Hills is the worst track in the game. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Not only is it incredibly boring, but it's somehow worse than its original version. Even though it's kinda cool that we drive through it backwards here, I can't even be excited about that. There is no fun parkour to do here to try and catch up, and there are barely any shortcuts, period. That makes this an extremely dull ending, and easily the weakest in Knockout Tour by far. Most of the other rallies were at least pretty close in this ranking, but from the terrible ending to a lot of really boring intermissions, the Cherry Rally is by far in last place. 7. The Ice Rally. This is a massive improvement over what we just saw, but there are still a lot of flaws. We begin on Sky High Sunday and have to drive to Starview Peak. Not only does the opening with the ice cream aesthetic automatically give this a more unique feel, but the rest of the section is pretty cool too. Jumping off the ice cream, we then have to drive on an icy path, which due to being slippery already makes the gameplay here a bit more interesting. There are not only plenty of cuts here, but also some half pipes and even penguins. I also like the ice cavern as a set piece too, so overall this is a really strong start to the rally. Section 2 has us going from Starview Peak to Dandelion Depths, and it's one of the more interesting intermissions. We have to jump down several icy slopes, but then we get faced with a split path. I think it's kind of neat when the rallies separate the racers out like this. The snowboarding setting also makes this pretty memorable. Unfortunately, I do think it is quite open, and once all of the paths recombine, it's a pretty dull straight shot forward. At the very least, the segment doesn't end there, so it doesn't feel miserable like the drive up to Koopa Troopa Beach did. Speaking of the ending though, it funnily enough doesn't end at Dandelion Depths, but instead some random highway. As far as I can tell, this is the only section to get cut off before really making it to the track in Knockout Tour. That's not really a good or bad thing, just mildly interesting, I guess. I can tell you what's not mildly interesting though, this section. Slide the funny roast gif on the screen, thank you. It's just some pretty basic road for a while. In fact, we don't even really get to see Dandelion Depths at all outside of like 3 bitty buds. After passing them though, we do get a bit of a fun area where we jump down off some ramps past several turns. It's very different from any other rally, so I found this part to be pretty memorable. After getting to drive through a little bit of Cheep Cheep Falls, section 4 has us drive through a lot of water. This area is super open and incredibly boring as there's really nothing to do beside driving straight. Getting back onto the road isn't much better as it's pretty much the most generic road in the game. It's very open and you just have to dodge a few cars. At the very least, there's a good amount of off-road, but that doesn't save this. The ending is especially bad though, as it's an incredibly long, straight shot with no items to Peach Stadium. Just like the Koopa Troopa Beach section from earlier, this just feels like prolonged misery if you got a bad item pull, as there's nothing you can do about it. You can hope someone gets hit by a car, but that's about it. The worst part about this though is that Peach Stadium does this exact thing in 3 different rallies. Yes, each path is slightly different, but they all end in an extremely long straight shot forward. Anyway, if you manage to make it through that, we get even more generic road. This is probably even worse though, as there's very little off-road due to being in a tunnel. There's really not much more to say on this section, so the final area has us do a lap of Crown City 1. Definitely a better track than Desert Hills, but with how much road we drive on in every intermission, this feels like a kind of lame choice for an ending. Especially since I would still consider this to be a bottom 5 track in the game. At least parkouring on the roofs is pretty fun, though the fact that the ending is another pretty straight shot forward does take a lot of the intensity out of the ending. 6. The Acorn Rally. This is where the ranking really starts to get more difficult, as a lot of the rallies from this point on are pretty close quality-wise. This kicks us off driving from Toad's Factory to Wario Stadium. I've always quite liked this intermission with the rolling chain chomps, as it's totally distinct from anything else. It is really open, so I wouldn't say it's hard to drive on, but I think it works alright enough as an opener. Section 2 having us fly into Wario Stadium feels really exciting, and just like in the Grand Prix, I love that we get to hear an announcer here. Sadly, we don't get to spend too long in the stadium itself, as we then get sent back on some pretty basic road toward Choco Mountain. There are a few interesting obstacles though, like this random Goomba pyramid in the off-road, some Patui piranha plants, and of course, Brambles, my beloved. I always like when they're on the intermissions because it's pretty fun to try and drive under them for a speed boost. But Tui piranha plants can also open up interesting gameplay opportunities depending on their item. Sometimes they'll be blowing something like a star above them, so if you want, you could try and take out the piranha plant to steal the star for yourself. Anyway, as we get closer to Choco Mountain, we have to drive through some chocolate terrain, which isn't too special, but it makes the off-road cut a bit scarier since you can drown. That continues into section 3, but I like how we have to dodge a few charging chucks here as well. After that though is just some more generic road, and since this is all leading up to Peach Stadium, a long miserable shot to the next checkpoint. I'm really not sure why they decided to do this so much. Our next segment is actually just a backwards version of an intermission we saw in the ice rally, and unfortunately, it was probably the worst one. This has us going from Peach Stadium to Cheep Cheep Falls, so now instead of going on the boring water into the boring road, we go from the boring road onto the boring water. Mind-blowing stuff here. At least the ending leading to Cheep Cheep Falls feels a lot better than the inverse. Speaking of, we get to drive through a bit of Cheep Cheep Falls for section 5, and it's very funny watching at least one person take the wrong turn here every single time. Sadly though, that's pretty much the highlight of this section, as most of it is on pretty generic open road through a tunnel. At the very least though, a lot of off-road cuts are thrown in near the end, which does make reaching the checkpoint itself very intense in the last few moments. And that brings us to the track we race a lap on, being DK Pass. Now I've heard a lot of people rank this track pretty low on their lists, but the more I play it, the more I kind of like it. Almost everywhere has a shortcut that you can take using the parkour mechanics, whether it be jumping off the pole, riding along the mountainside, or even jumping off trees. That means there is a lot of opportunity to both catch up or take the risk to extend your lead. Honestly, I think that makes DK Pass a really strong ending track, as it doesn't fully rely on you getting a good item pool. It remains intense for the entire lap, even right up until the end because of that off-road cut. I'm honestly really sad that there were so many boring intermissions here, because DK Pass helps us rally out quite a bit. Also, I have to mention that it's diabolical to not include Acorn Heights in the Acorn Rally. Why did they do that? 5. The Spiny Rally. I found this to be a really mixed bag with a lot of good and also a lot of mid. Starting off in Boo Cinema was pretty much a guarantee for a good section as we get to drive through Ghost Valley. This is one of the SNES reference tracks thrown into the open world, and those are always pretty fun to race on, especially compared to the normal stuff. Honestly though, after driving through the spooky forest and going into the ice area, it gets even better. A lot of this rally takes place on these thin, icy pathways. They are far more skinny than pretty much anything else in these rallies, which makes the 24 people squishing together all the more frightening. This continues for section 2 as well, having us drive past some Typhoon, which can blow us off. When we arrive at Starview Peak, we also have to avoid some chill bullies. I just kind of like that they're in this game since they literally haven't appeared in anything since Mario 64 DS in 2004. Look how happy he is to be back! Moving past them brings us through even more skinny ice roads up until section 3. This is the last we'll see of the ice roads where we have to dodge a floating Ice Bros attacks. I think it works well as an obstacle, and overall this was a really strong opening set of sections. It's some of the most memorable routes in Knockout Tour, but sadly that means the stuff that comes after this is not nearly as good. Driving past a few snow pokies, we take a glider ramp onto the road. This is about as generic as it gets. Nothing bad per se, but really nothing worth noting here. Oh, except the brambles. Woo, love brambles, yeah! I do think the end of the section at Salty Salty Speedway is pretty good though. It's in the water and very tight, which makes it easy to get hit here or lose control of yourself, making it a pretty intense ending to cross the line. Sadly, the route after this to Peach Beach is pretty underwhelming. You have the choice to either drive on the beach or go through the water, but it really doesn't feel like an interesting risk and reward sort of thing. The water is just better because it lets you take the turns tighter and avoid obstacles. I guess going on the beach may help you avoid getting targeted by other racers, but if you fall behind in the process, what's the point? In the water itself, the gameplay is nothing interesting either, as you pretty much just hold A with a light bit of a turn. This gets even worse in the next section, as it's pretty much just as straight away in the water. Really exciting gameplay they got us doing here. At least when we were on the generic roads, there were some cars to avoid, but there's basically nothing to do in the water at all here. Near the end, it does at least get a bit more wavy, but that does not make up for just how boring this section was as a whole. As for the track we end on, that would be Wario Shipyard. This has been a pretty controversial track ever since launch, and I'm honestly pretty split on it myself. At the very least, it is better than both Desert Hills and Crown City. There are a few areas to do parkour to catch up, like this pipe on the rock and the ropes after the cannon shot. Definitely not as good of an ender as DK Pass in my opinion, but it's at least decent. So for having a really strong first few sections and a decent ending, I think the Spiny Rally is mostly able to make up for the really boring water stuff, at least a little bit. For the Golden Rally. This is the very first one in the game, and I think they started us off pretty strong. At least when talking about this rally as a whole, the first actual section here is pretty mid. We go from Desert Hills to Mario Bros. Circuit, and I guess it is fair to start on a more generic opener if it's literally the first rally in the game. At least the brambles make an appearance again. Luckily, Section 2 I like a lot more, where we get to drive through most of Mario Bros. Circuit backwards. Obviously, this track isn't as good as something like Toad's Factory, but hey, I'll take driving on any track I can get. Except Desert Hills, I genuinely think I prefer intermissions. After the track though, it's back to a bit more of the basic road stuff. I do at least like the portion with the concourse and jumps, that did feel pretty fun. Before we make it to Choco Mountain though, we get to race through a reference to Choco Island 2 from Super Mario Kart. Like I said with the Ghost Valleys, I really like when they do this, and I think I might even prefer it in this case. This acts as a split path, but since each pathway is different, it feels like a more impactful choice. This is also the case in Section 3 as we exit Choco Mountain to race through Choco Island 1 in the same way. Having both of these back to back was really cool and definitely helped make this area stand out a bit. From there, we have to drive past some Patui piranha plants and it's back on the generic road. It is nice to see some Monty Moles and Moo Moos thrown in though. Speaking of, Section 4 brings us to Moo Moo Meadows where we drive through the first half of the track. That puts us back on the generic road once more, but I do like to see some Charge and Chucks join the action as obstacles. They should probably get off the road. This leads us down into a portion of SNES Mario Circuit. It's kind of fitting that we get to drive through part of both Mario Circuits for the first rally. Section 5 is a really strong one as we get to make our way through a forest. This is a pretty unique setting shift and I like all the special elements here like the wigglers and plants to rail grind on. Plus we have a split path leading up to the track where we have to try and avoid falling acorns, which I thought was a really strong ender for this section. Speaking of strong endings, we finally got a really good course in the form of Acorn Heights. This is one of the game's best nitro courses as it has so many different areas to parkour around. There are plenty of off-road and non-off-road cuts to keep this lap intense all the way through. I especially like how the ending turn has a little smidge of off-road, which is perfect for a last second pass. So while a lot of this rally is pretty generic, we do get a fantastic ending track for once, and none of the sections were even that bad anyway. I think this works as a strong introduction to Knockout Tour, and I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. 3. The Heart Rally. The top 3 was extremely difficult for me to put together, as I'd say these 3 are easily the best and are extremely close. We can see what makes this one good right away as we begin in Shy Guy Bazaar. We actually get to race through the opening market portion, and I think it's always great to drive on the actual tracks. Now that does lead us to a fairly plain desert area, but I do like that we have to avoid camels as obstacles. They probably want revenge after I sucked so bad at Camel Drop. It is cool to get a small appearance of Chain Chomp Desert here, as the flowing sand can make the Chain Chomps harder to avoid. But the best part of this section comes after the cannon shot as we make our way up to Airship Fortress. I like that we have to take a big turn on this floating bit of road before making it all the way up. It just adds a bit more gameplay. Landing onto the airship itself is also a lot of fun as we come in with a glider and have the choice to rail grind or just simply drive on the road. I think this was a really good way to implement the track, and it gets even better at the end of this section as it has us drive underneath the track's opening bridge. That gives us a very confined space, which makes this a pretty scary ending as it's much easier to get hit. But if you manage to survive that, you can enter Section 2, which has us drive along the wall of Bowser's Castle. This is definitely a very memorable and unique location for these knockout tours, and I like just how many enemies we get to avoid here. Hammer Bros, the Womps, Sumo Bros, and even Boom Boom himself all try to stop us as we make our way through. I do think it maybe lasts a bit long, but it also has Sumo Bros, so it's automatically peak. What's not peak though is the water area after we jump off the wall. As much as I love Fishbones, this feels pretty boring to drive through as it's another one of those hold forward water segments. That brings us into Dry Bones Burnout for Section 3. Sadly though, we don't get to spend any time on the track itself, despite this being its only appearance in Knockout Tour. First no costumes and now this, why do they hate you? Luckily, I still quite like this section as we get to drive through the graveyard area surrounding the track. I always like the vibe of this intermission, and it also has a ton of off-road to cut through, which always feels satisfying. It's also cool to get some unique enemies here like Dry Bones and Fire Snakes. Eventually though, we do reach a bit of a normal road, leading us to SNES Mario Circuit for Section 4. I like that we get to race through a bit of this track, specifically parts of Mario Circuit 2 and 3. They pretty much covered the best parts with the jump and extremely tight turns, so I'm pretty happy with this. After that, we have to make our way to Moo Moo Meadows, which is just on some pretty generic road for the most part. There is a glider section before we get there, but I honestly don't love these as it's also just going straight forward for a prolonged period of time. I do like that when we reach Moo Moo Meadows though, we get to drive through about half of it backwards before reaching Section 5. Sadly, Section 5 is definitely the weakest, being another lead up to Peach Stadium. It's basically the same as all the others, a very generic open road into a long stretch of misery before the end. I'm really not sure why they included this in so many of the rallies. But that does mean we end racing at Peach Stadium. And thank goodness it's not this version. Honestly, the normal version of the track is just okay to me. There are some decent cuts, but I still think DK Pass is a better ending. At the very least, this is better than Desert Hills and Crown City, but I still think I would have preferred several other tracks over this ending. Overall though, the Heart Rally did have a lot of good content, especially at the start. It just sort of whimpers out at the end. to the Moon Rally. Mario Odyssey reference, whoa! This has us begin at Bowser's Castle. Yes, I know the hardest for Mario Odyssey 2, shut up. This has us begin by gliding down from Bowser's Castle. This is its only appearance in Knockout Tour, which is a huge shame since it's one of the best tracks in the game. The fact that it's not one of the ending tracks that we have to do a lap on is genuinely kind of appalling. It fits so well. But regardless, gliding down is a pretty fun start, and I like driving on Big Donut afterwards. After a few turns on some gray road, we do have a bit of a misery stretch. Since the item boxes came right before the water though, it feels more exciting than most of the others we've seen on the list so far, since you'll usually have at least a few options. That brings us into section 2, which is one of the best sections in any of these rallies, simply because we basically get to do a full lap on Toad's factory. That's one of the best tracks in the game, so I'm really happy we got to experience almost the whole thing. They did sadly cut the best part out with the metal bars at the end, but it does make sense because we have to go a completely opposite direction. Gone but not forgotten. The rest of this section is on some road, but it's at least made a little special with the sloped walls. It definitely makes it feel more fun to drive through anyway. Sadly, these walls don't last the whole section, but at least from that point on, some cows do come onto the road for Moo Moo Meadows. Going into Moo Moo Meadows for section 3, we get to drive through about half the track. It's kind of weird that we do this in 2 different rallies, but hey, at least it's kind of fun. After that, the road is pretty basic again, all the way up until Dandelion Depths. I like what they do with this course for section 4 though, as we have to dive into its cavern area, and then we get to ride along the river it's connected to. Now, I've been pretty harsh on the water segments throughout this video, but this one I found to be much more enjoyable. It's far less open than most of the others, which keeps the racers sandwiched together. There's also plenty of stuff to trick on as we go, like rocks and small bumps in the water. I won't pretend it's the best segment in the world, as the lack of obstacles does hurt, but it's certainly better than a lot of the other water segments. I also think this flows, very nicely into Cheep Cheep Falls for section 5. Jumping off of a waterfall directly into the second half of the track is just really cool, and of course, actually racing on the track for a bit is a treat as well. Once we get out of the water and back onto the road, we had the lead up to Faraway Oasis. The great part about that is that the lead up to Faraway Oasis is always better than the track itself, as we actually get to drive with some animals. It's nice to see the buffaloes run on the track here. Unfortunately, the bad part is that it's a lead up to Faraway Oasis, one of my least favorite tracks in the game. It's just so boring and plain to me, and that makes it a pretty weak ending in my opinion. Granted, a lot better than Desert Hills, because at least this track does have some parkour, but it's still far from a favorite. Honestly, I think if this rally had a better ending track, the Moon Rally easily could have taken number 1. I mean, we get to literally go through several racetracks here. It's just the end that's tanking this so hard for me. Really wish I could love Faraway Oasis, but for now, I think I'm just gonna have to keep the Moon Rally as our runner-up. 1. The Cloud Rally. We start off with a bang as we shoot out from Airship Fortress down into the desert. This is partially a reverse version of the opening segment of the Heart Rally, so we once again get to drive through Chain Chomp Desert and part of Shy Guy Bazaar backwards. This isn't as good as that one's opener since we do miss out on the Airship Fortress stuff, but this is still a great start. Now I will say that section 2 does drag this rally down a bit, as it's pretty generic all things considered. A lot of driving in the desert and then a lot of driving on the road. It's nice to see camels again, but really that's the best I can say about this section. Heck, this generic road also continues past Mario Bros Circuit and into section 3. Again, there's really not much to note here leading up to Crown City. I do like the very end of this segment having a split path, which I think works for some out of nowhere passes, but beside that, yeah, this is pretty generic all things considered. Things really gotta start picking up here, or I'm gonna look like an idiot for putting this at number 1. Well, luckily, I think this rally does just that by having section 4 take us across this game's giant bridge. Now, by the looks of things, this seems like it should just be a super boring straight line. However, I actually quite like this segment, as the cars are really packed in tight here. The high amount of bomb cars and limited space racers have to move can make it fun to try and get people blown up by using your items. There are also plenty of safer side paths in case you want to avoid getting hit, just at the cost of going a bit slower. The bridge will also open up at points to give us a big jump, which is pretty fun if you get to take advantage of it. Plus, the cars that drop mushrooms here add a good bit of risk and reward as you swerve between the cars to pick them up. So in my opinion, this bridge intermission has always been deceptively good. That leads us to section 5, which is based around Faraway Oasis, and like I said before, I love the intermissions connected to this track as we get to deal with the animals. This time we get even more animals than just the buffalo, as we also get a big horde of zebra and also some elephants stomping onto the road. Then the second half of this section brings us into a foresty area with a ton of piranha plants. We see a bunch of patui, which are fun to strategize around, and it's nice to get a few normal piranha plants chomping at the side of the road too. But this is all leading up into our final track of the video, Great Question Block Ruins. This is easily the best final track used in a Knockout Tour, and it's what's carrying this rally into the number 1 spot. This is one of the best tracks in the series due to its solid difficulty and insane shortcuts. Pretty much everywhere you look, there's a hidden cut, which makes this a perfect ender for Knockout Tour. You really have to balance the risk and reward of each cut, as missing it could easily lead to a loss, but also not going for one that someone does could just be throwing away the win. And of course, there's also the massive shortcut at the end, which is very difficult to pull off, but having the option if you're really far behind can make for a legendary comeback. I think this track really puts into perspective how much of a missed opportunity the other rallies had by not finishing on such a banger. Honestly though, I don't think you could beat Great Question Mark Block Ruins in this format. So for having by far the best ender and a lot of pretty solid sections as well, I think the Cloud Rally takes the crown as the best rally in Mario Kart World. But anyways, that's it for this video. Do you love this specific turn I'm showing on screen and hate me for not bringing it up in detail? Let me know in the comments. I had a lot more fun with this ranking than I was expecting to, as it was pretty difficult to put the list together. Hopefully my opinions are not the worst in the world on this one. Speaking of the worst thing in the world though, college is already being brutal to me this semester, so sorry if uploads are shorter for a little while or just off schedule in general. But before I go, I've got to thank my members being Fredbear's Diner, Schmendy, Maidzio2, Magnus Larslot, Trifector, Luma, Tibby, Drybones Likes Fire Protection. No, he doesn't. Mario Aster 101, Hippopotamus, Levi Strux, Nuclear, Cassie Channel, Blessed Tiger, Yanni the Duck, Wyatt Derpy, Trader Mo, Mevins 2001, Kitrex 15, Enchanted Skull, SMA, B Major 2003, Arson the Raboot, Sir Moosty, Belandor, Cinder CC, Jade Avery, Pronto Clone, Thicky Reiki, Ungenio TM, CW McCain, JubeTube, Tesseract, Mr. McMahon 5702, Jameson Pageson, Golden Sandslash 15, Z-Frost, Stuffy Ant, Just Dex, Concanut Keep, and Christian Flattery Sequel Edition. But anyways, Drybones for Smash, and I'll see you guys next time.